Hello. In this session, I'm going to talk about seam allowance. I'm going to advise you what type of seam allowance you will need for your morning coat. Traditionally, tailors will include their seam allowance into the pattern itself. I don't do that as it's still a costume, so I can adjust my seam allowance when I start cutting from the top fabric. And sometimes I add more or less, depends on how confident I feel and depends of the model as well. So, yeah, it gives me opportunity to adjust. So this one only the advisable seam allowance. So you obviously can have, if you've got more experience, you can have less seam allowance or different seam allowance. So this one adjustable, only I suggest for you. So if you look at the one of the papers, this one, it's the actual morning coat with the back panel, the front panel and the side and the skirt. So this one's quite important for you to look at. So each panel I have, can you see the little arrows? That shows the straight of grain. So how you place your patterns on the fabric. So you have to go straight of grain along those lines. Now, if I just concentrate on the back panel, so you've got center back here with the vent and that's the half of the side pleat here. So, and of course the hem. Now, seam allowance will go on your center back will be 5 centimeters seam allowance, including the vent on that side is 5 centimeters. Your neckline, armhole, side seam, along the half vent will be 2.5. Shoulder, I will give 5 centimeters because with the shoulder, I can readjust the position and make my armhole bigger or neckline bigger. So this one is quite useful to have 5 centimeters at the shoulders and you can trim them later. Always give 5 centimeters at the hem because it does help you if it's for some reason it's too short, it gives you enough fabric to play around. So 5 centimeters at the hem. Now the side panel, that's the side panel. The side panel goes everywhere, 2.5 on the side seam where attaches with the front. Armhole, 2.5, 2.5 seam where attaches to your back panel. But I will give 5 centimeters at the bottom of your side panel. The reason is because, you know, if that panel here, if the waist line here is too high, so you can always drop along the waist line. So this will drop to waist, so you always can drop and make it that part longer. Okay, so it's very important. Again, some people don't do that. 2.5 could be enough if your measurements are precise and your drafting is good. So then you don't need to have 5 centimeters. But I am at that for the fitting. After the fitting, you can change it, adjust it, and trim your seam allowance. Now, that's front panel. The front panel will have 2.5 on the side, armhole 2.5, neckline 2.5, including that part of the lapel 2.5. Then we go to the front edge. The front edge, you have to be very careful. It's not the center front. Your center front is here, and then we have extra is for the button stand. So that's extra fabric here for overlapping and the button stand. So we call that line goes through the lapel to your front edge, which is front edge you will need 5 centimeters. just in case if your lapel will change, the shape is changed, and also you know, it gets slightly too small. And usually happens that it's you know, the actor may have a little belly, and you can accommodate that by having that extra seam allowance. So I'll always give 5 centimeters at the front edge. And of course, you drop waistline there. It's 5 centimeters, the same as your side panel. So it's quite important. Now we go to your skirt panel, and in the skirt we have the half of your pleat and have the all the front edge. That's the curved one. It's the front edge. So cut away. So with the waist, on the waist, your skirt at the top is 2.5. You don't need 5 centimeters in that, because usually it's what you will have extra you know, the fabric at the bottom edge, so therefore you don't need to change that. So 2.5 is plenty. Even if you need to let it out a little bit, you've got plenty fabric on that waist. So 2.5 along your pleat, and of course 5 centimeters, the same as your front, 5 centimeters along that front edge on the skirt. Then we have your flap. So the flap, which is goes with between those little notches. With the flap, I gave 2.5 at the waist. So that's part, the top one is the waist, which is matches with your waist line. And then I give only 1 centimeter. As is a standard measurement, you don't need to have any more, unless obviously you wish to add extra seam allowance, you can. But otherwise, 1 centimeter all around here will be absolutely enough. We go to your collar. So with the collar, it's quite different. So with the collar, I will advise you to cut collar later, which is I have a video about the collar, how to prepare your collar, how to cut your collar. So I will advise you to leave your collar and do not cut yet. But you do have seam allowance. This one is under collar, not top collar, as your under collar have a seam allowance at the center back. So you've got 2.5 all around, just to keep it simple. But as I said, you know, I will advise you to have your partner and go to the video where I will talk about collars. This is under collar. They also will talk about top collar, a layer which would not have seam at the center back. Now, the next part I'm going to talk about is your sleeve. So the sleeve goes in 2 pieces. So the top sleeve with the head goes over your shoulder, and under sleeve, which goes under your arm. And as you see, that will go under your arm, so you don't need to have a lot of fabric in that area. And we have a cuff. This particular cuff is a false cuff, as it's not what I mean by it's not the 3D cuff. So it's not goes on top of your sleeve. It's actually part of your sleeve. So you only will have a seam, which is you know, puts those two together. Now with the cuff, when you draft your cuff, you have cuff into pieces. I will advise you to join them together on the front seam, to join them together and to have one continuous cuff. If you know, usually you can have either way. You can have your cuff with the seam at the front or without seam. I prefer without seam, as they're with a thick fabric, which is we're using it for our morning coat. It just creates so much thickness in that area here and in the hem, so therefore it's easier and looks nicer when a cuff is in one piece. Now, seam allowance. Seam allowance on your sleeve is the head of the sleeve. You I never give more than 2.5, otherwise it will just be very difficult to insert your sleeve into your armhole. For armhole, I only gave 2.5, no more than 2.5, otherwise it became too small. And bigger seam allowance, the smaller your armhole, and therefore it's more difficult to insert your sleeve. So 2.5 around the head of your sleeve, 2.5 on the seams each side, front and back. So this is the front seam, this is the back. And then I will give 5 centimeters at the bottom of your sleeve. The reason it's not for the hem is just in case your sleeve need to be lengthened, and you can have extra seam allowance on the length to lengthen your sleeve. Now we go to undersleeve, 2.5 where you got the sleeve head, so that is undersleeve. Yeah, 2.5. The back of your seam, 2.5, front 2.5, and the bottom of your sleeve is 5 centimeters. Okay, again the same as your top sleeve. So when it's together at the feet, you can lengthen it. To be honest, I will advise you to have a fitting with the sleeve, which is in calico first. It always helps, you know, to see how sleeve sits. Now we go to your calf. Unfortunately, I'm just going to write it down here. It's 5 centimeters. So it's not been showing. Yes, so it's 5 centimeters at the bottom here. So we will have 2.5 everywhere. So 2.5 everywhere all around, and then 5 centimeters at the bottom hem. Again, usually it's just, you know, to create a nice clear hem, but you can still use that extra fabric here, which is always will be kept if you needed to make it your sleeve slightly longer. Usually the cuffs are standard size, but sometimes you can make it shorter or longer, you know, by keeping those seam allowance. And also it's nice finish when you keep those seam allowance here. It will give you a nice finish for that. Now, the next part we're going to talk about seam allowance for your lining, which is very, very, very important. The lining patterns is pretty much similar to your front pattern, except, similar to all your patterns of your morning coat, except the front panel. So when you cut your lining, do not cut that part from your lining, because you will have a separate facing and lining for your morning coat. So just go very quickly through. So your back panel exactly the same as your top fabric, with the seam allowances exactly the same. 5 centimeters at shoulders, 2.5 at the armhole, 2.5 along the seam, along your the pleat, 2.5 neckline, 5 centimeters at the back, center back. I give 2.5 here. It's just a little for the vent. It's 2.5 on that area. People get you know, confused about, just give 2.5, 5 centimeters along the vent and 5 centimeters at the bottom. So that would be your lining. Same as your side panel, 2.5 everywhere, 5 centimeters at the waist. Skirt, 2.5 on your waistline, 2.5 along your half pleat, and 5 centimeters the front edge. With the lining on the flap, I would give exactly same 2.5 and 1 centimeter on each side. You do not need to cut the your collar. So the collar will never be cut from your lining, as it comes cut in top fabric. Okay, so do not cut your collar and lining. And do not cut your collar, you do not cut your lining, which is the front panel. You don't need to cut that either. So remember that, do not cut that, otherwise it will be waste of your lining. Instead, what you need to do is, you will need to go to this diagram here, and that's where you're going to cut your facing and lining as a separate. So your front will be divided into your facing and lining. So your facing will be cut in top fabric, and the seam allowance you will give is 5 centimeters at the shoulders, standard one, 2.5 along the neckline, 2.5 where you join with your lining, 5 centimeters at the bottom of your facing, and 5 centimeters of at the front edge. So that's a standard, exactly the same like you would give at the front. Then you've got your lining piece. With lining piece, similar, you've got 2.5 when you're joining with the facing, 2.5 seam allowance, 5 centimeters at the shoulder, 2.5 along the armhole, and then you will go 2.5 side seam and the 5 centimeters along your waistline there. So it's pretty much standard, goes everywhere. We've so with all that information, it's of course, you know, you need to all remember and be careful to go through my instruction. Now we're going to your sleeve. The sleeve, you know, lining for the sleeve is exactly the same. Repeats what we have here. And sometimes tailors do include, you know, as a one go, your cuff and your sleeve as a one go, as a one piece. This is just for being a more simpler, just do it the same, and actually it's easy for you to apply together, and you will easily understand what actually is going on when you start making it. So just advise you to have, you know, lining for the cuff, lining for undersleeve, and lining for the top sleeve, the same seam allowance. So just to reiterate, you don't need to cut the front of your panel from the lining, as we have already have facing and lining here, and you don't need to cut lining for your collar, as it will be cut in top fabric later on. I hope this was helpful to you. Lots of information, but please concentrate and really follow my advice. Thank you. Bye.